My name was Father Alejandro. For 30 years, my life was the smell of incense mixed with the dust from the streets of Masaya, Nicaragua. My routine was simple: 6 o'clock mass, confessions, visits to the sick. I knew every face, every story, every pain of my people. They weren't just my flock, they were my family. And it was trying to protect this family that I met my end. In those days, hatred boiled in the streets. It wasn't a war for land or money. It was a war against the cross. I remember the sound of the church bells, not ringing for mass, but as a desperate alarm. People were running, the smell of smoke in the air. I only thought about getting everyone inside, turning the sacred temple into a refuge. But they came in. I cannot erase from memory the sound of the century-old wooden door breaking, the scream of a lady I had just sheltered. I placed myself in front of her, arms spread wide. Everything happened very quickly. A hot and sharp pain in my chest that stole my breath. My knees gave way. I fell slowly, watching the frightened faces of my people grow distant. The pain disappeared. Fear was gone. The noise of chaos was replaced by a deep, absolute silence. I felt my soul detaching from my body, like an anchor being cut from a ship. I was floating, and I wasn't alone. I expected darkness, maybe harsh judgment, but what happened next was far more intense than anything I could imagine. Before all that, I need to confess something, a secret I took to the grave, literally. Seen from outside, I was the image of faith, Father Alejandro, the pillar of the community, the man who had the answers, who held the hands of the dying and whispered words of comfort in eternal life. But inside I was dying of thirst beside a fountain. My life was a ritual. Waking before the sun, the cold floor of the church on my knees, the smell of melted wax and old paper from prayer books. Mass, confession, baptism, last rites. The cycle of life passed through me and I was the conductor, God's employee. I loved my people truly, but my love had become bureaucratic. It was love of duty, not love that burned. I heard terrible confessions in the darkness of that wooden confessional. Adultery, theft, lies that destroyed families. I murmured the words of absolution, ego te absolvo, and felt a bitter taste in my mouth. Because the greatest sinner there many times was me. My sin wasn't of the flesh, it was of the spirit. It was the sin of being there, a hollow man dressed in holiness, speaking of a fire I myself barely felt anymore. I remember a lady, Dona Inés, her son had been taken, disappeared. She came to me, her eyes a well of pain. I recited the right passages about hope, about God's will. I said everything the seminary taught me, but while I spoke, I saw in her eyes. She didn't need theology. She needed a hug, someone to cry with her, and I couldn't. I gave her a blessing and sent her home with her heart as broken as before. That night, I didn't pray. I just looked at the crucifix on my bedroom wall and asked silently, "Where are you, Lord? In me, I know you're not anymore." This emptiness consumed me. I smiled, I blessed, I celebrated the Eucharist with steady hands, but inside I was a desert. I had the keys to the kingdom of heaven, but felt my own door was locked from the inside. I prayed for a sign, for anything that would break that stone shell that had formed around my heart. I just never imagined the answer would come in the form of a bullet, and that to truly find God I would first need to die. The week before my death was strange, full of whispers in the wind, signs that I, blinded by my own crisis of faith, chose to ignore. Today I see. They were warnings. God wasn't silent. I just wasn't listening. It all started with a dream 3 nights before. I dreamed my church was full of water, crystal clear water up to the stained glass. And all my people were there, floating in peace, smiling. But I was at the altar, dry, my throat scratching with thirst. I tried to drink that water, but my hands couldn't reach it. I woke with my heart pounding, tasting dust in my mouth. The next day, the first real warning appeared, graffitied on the white wall of the parish. Red letters, dripping like blood, "God is dead." I took a bucket and brushed myself. While scrubbing the wall, I felt a chill down my spine that didn't come from the wind. It was the silence of my neighbors. No one came out to help. The windows remained closed. Fear had already settled in the houses, and I hadn't noticed. But the clearest sign came in the form of a face I knew. Mateo, a boy I practically watched grow up, whose mother I helped raise after his father disappeared. He stopped me on the street in the late afternoon. He was no longer the choir boy. He wore a black shirt, his face closed, eyes cold as 2 river stones. He didn't call me father, he said, "Alejandro." His voice was a razor's edge. "Leave the city. Take whoever you can and go." I put my hand on his shoulder, the same shoulder I had so often patted after a sermon. It was hard, tense. "What's happening, my son?" He pulled away from my touch as if it burned. The "This is no longer God's house," he said, looking at the church tower. "And soon it won't be anyone's house." He turned and walked away without looking back. I stood in the middle of the street feeling the weight of those words. What did he mean by that? That night, the smell of burning tires reached my room. The distant sound of sirens became the city's soundtrack. I tried to pray, but the words seemed hollow, an echo in an empty well. I didn't feel God's presence. I felt the presence of something approaching, something hungry. It's the last Mass I celebrated I'll never forget. It was morning Mass. Few people came. The faces were tired, frightened. When I raised the host, my hand trembled. And at the moment of consecrating the wine, when I took the first sip from the chalice, a metallic, thick, and warm taste invaded my mouth. I almost choked right there at the altar. It wasn't wine, it was blood, and it had the bitter taste of my own end. In that moment, I knew. I knew that the dream, the graffiti, Mateo's warning, everything was connected. I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't flee. My flock was here, my post was here. I looked at the crucifix above the altar, and for the first time in years, I didn't ask for a sign. I simply said silently, "Thy will be done." I just didn't know his will would be fulfilled in a few hours with the sound of the church door breaking. Do you believe in premonitions? In signs that something terrible is about to happen? Leave your opinion here in the comments. If this story touched you somehow, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because my journey was just beginning and what I saw on the other side needs to be told. The sound of the door breaking wasn't a crack, it was a scream. The scream of century-old wood that for a lifetime had only opened to welcome, being violated. Splinters flew like broken teeth. For a second, deadly silence fell over the church, that kind of silence that comes before an avalanche. And then, panic exploded. People screamed, they ran with nowhere to go. I saw the face of Dona Elvira, a lady who made bread for communion, contort in pure terror. She was paralyzed near the altar. At the door, against the streetlight, silhouettes of men entered. They weren't soldiers. They were something worse. They were hatred incarnate. They advanced, and I could only think of protecting. My body moved before my mind. I ran and placed myself in front of Dona Elvira, opening my arms as I did to bless everyone at the end of Mass. The cross on my chest felt heavy, a target. My eyes sought their leader, and that's when my heart broke, even before the bullet. It was Mateo, the same boy who had warned me. His face, which before was full of life, was now a stone mask. His eyes, those eyes had nothing inside. They were empty. He raised his hand, and in it was something metal, dark and ugly. Our gazes met. For a fraction of a second I saw the boy I knew inside there screaming to get out, but he had already drowned. I felt no hatred. I only felt a deep sadness, a sadness that seemed to come from God himself. "My son," I whispered, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The sound was a dry thunder inside the church. I felt a hot blow to my chest, like a giant's punch. It stole my breath. It stole my strength. My knees buckled, and the world began to spin in slow motion. I was falling backward. The last thing I saw was Dona Elvira's terrified face, and above her, the stained glass of Christ, the Good Shepherd, with a lamb in his arms. My body hit the cold marble floor. A sharp, burning pain, and then nothing. The pain simply switched off, like a light being turned out. The people's screams grew distant, as if I were sinking into water. My final thoughts weren't an elaborate prayer. It wasn't a request for forgiveness for my years of doubt. It was just a silent question, echoing in the void I was becoming. Was it enough? I felt my chest rise and fall one last time. A sigh. Smell of incense and gunpowder mixed and then disappeared. The colors of the stained glass turned to shades of gray. And then darkness. Absolute and silent blackness. But the darkness lasted only an instant. I felt a pull. Not on my body, which I knew was down there, lifeless, but on my essence. It was as if an anchor that bound me to the world had been cut. I began to float. And when I opened my eyes, I no longer had eyes. I saw in all directions at once. I saw my body fallen on the church floor, saw the despair of my people, saw Mateo standing, looking at what he had done, with the first tear running down that empty face. I felt nothing for him anymore, neither anger nor pity. I was beyond that. I expected the final judgment, darkness or nothingness. But what came next wasn't in any book I'd ever read. I no longer had weight. It was as if I had spent my entire life wearing heavy, wet armor, and only at that instant had it been removed from me. The sensation wasn't of emptiness, but of freedom. A freedom so absolute it was almost frightening. I floated, not in air, but in a different dimension, right there in the middle of my own church. I had no eyes, but I saw everything. And it wasn't like seeing with human vision, limited, focused in one direction. I saw it in 360 degrees. Saw the grain of dust dancing in the beam of light entering through the broken stained glass. Saw the untouched spiderweb in the highest corner of the ceiling. Saw my own body, fallen in a strange way on the floor, a dark stain spreading on the white cassock. It was like looking at old clothes I had just taken off. There was no more connection. And it was there, in this state of local omniscience, that I saw the secret no one else saw. The tear. A single, solitary tear that escaped from Mateo's eye and ran down his stone face. He looked at his own hands, at the weapon that still smoked, and his body trembled in an almost imperceptible spasm. No one saw. Everyone was screaming, running, looking at me. But I saw. The boy I knew was still inside there, drowned in a sea of hatred he himself had created. I tried to approach, tried to speak, but I had no mouth, no vocal cords. My thoughts were my voice, but they didn't reach the physical world. People's screams didn't enter through my ears. I felt them as vibrations, waves of panic and pain that passed through me without affecting me. I was a ghost, a silent witness to the tragedy I myself was starring in. But what happened next was even stranger. The scene of my church, so solid, so real seconds before, began to lose sharpness. The edges of things began to dissolve like an old photograph dipped in water. The sound of chaos was transforming into a low, constant hum, the frequency of the universe. I was being pulled away, not up, not down. It was a pull inward. The darkness around me began to gain color. Not colors I knew, but tones that don't exist on Earth. And in the middle of that blackness that was becoming luminous, I felt a presence. It wasn't something I saw, but something I knew. It was a consciousness so vast, so ancient, and so full of love that my own essence seemed like a drop of water before an infinite ocean. The fear I didn't even know I was feeling dissolved completely, replaced by a peace I'd spent 30 years trying to describe in my sermons and never came close. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in decades I didn't feel the weight of doubt or my empty priesthood. I felt like I was finally coming home. It wasn't a tunnel of light like we hear about. It was like diving into an ocean made not of water but of peace. A peace so dense, so real that I could feel it washing every corner of my soul. All my weariness, my 30 years of doubt, the weight of my empty priesthood, everything was dissolved in a wave of pure mercy. I felt more naked than the day I was born, and more loved than I ever dreamed possible. In that place, time didn't exist, only the now. And in that eternal now, I wasn't alone. A light began to form in front of me. It wasn't a blinding light like the sun's. It was a light that welcomed, a light that knew you completely, that saw every flaw, every sin, every secret thought I'd had, and even so, the only thing emanating from it was love. An unconditional love that asked for nothing in return. And at the center of that light, a form became clear. It wasn't the long-haired, bearded Jesus from the paintings in my church. It was a figure made of light itself, but unmistakably human. It was the presence, the Lamb, the bread of life. I knew with every fiber of my being that I was before Christ, and without needing to think, my soul knelt. Communication wasn't with words, it was a direct flow of thought, of feeling. It was as if his voice echoed within my very essence. Alejandro, good and faithful servant, your struggle on earth has ended. The voice was calm, powerful, but carried a loving sadness that broke what remained of my heart. My Lord, my God, I thought, and the shame of my hollow life flooded me. I am not worthy. The answer came like a balm. It is my blood that makes you worthy. But many, whom I also call, close the door from the inside. There, before the source of all truth, a question sprouted from my priestly soul. The question that haunted me all my life. Lord, who cannot enter your kingdom? And with pain that seemed to be the pain of all creation, he showed me, not with words, but with visions, with feelings that imprinted themselves on me forever. They weren't the obvious sinners I always condemned in the confessional. They were three groups that shocked me deeply. The first I saw were those with hearts of stone. He didn't show me murderers or great criminals. He showed me ordinary people. A lady who refused to forgive her sister over an inheritance fight, a man who nursed a grudge against a friend for decades. I saw their hearts. They were literally like gray granite. They prayed, went to Mass, but inside they clung to resentment like a precious treasure. And I understood. Heaven is a place of absolute forgiveness. Quote, those who don't forgive can't breathe the air there. Their resentment becomes a wall, a private hell they themselves built. Then he showed me the second group, the merchants of the temple, and again it wasn't what I expected. I saw religious leaders in expensive clothes using God's name to sell promises of wealth. I saw people using the cross as a brand to gain power and fame, but I also saw more subtle things. I saw people who did charity only to post on the internet. I saw those who used faith as a tool to feel superior to others. They turned the Father's house into a business, faith into a product, and its voice echoed in me. They loved the sound of applause and coins more than the cry of the needy. But the saddest vision, the one that broke me inside, was of the third group, the most numerous, the lukewarm. I saw church packed with people, but their eyes were empty. They performed a ritual, but without fire, without love. I saw a man in a comfortable house watching news of a tragedy on TV and simply changing the channel. I saw a woman passing a hungry beggar and pretending a phone call. They weren't evil, but they also weren't good. Their life was an eternal whatever, and I understood the most terrible truth of all. The opposite of love isn't hatred, it's indifference. For them, the kingdom of burning love was a strange fire, an unknown place. I was there, floating in that ocean of light, seeing those souls trapped not by divine chains, but by their own choices. There wasn't a gate with a guard. The threshold, the frontier, was the very state of the heart. Heaven isn't a prize for the perfect. It's a home for those who learn to love. And those souls simply no longer knew how to do it. They had unlearned. And while I felt God's sadness for these lost children, his voice sounded one last time, not as an end, but as an order. Your mission isn't finished, Alejandro. Go back. Go back. That word wasn't a sound. It was a command that vibrated in every particle of my soul. And for the first time in that place of absolute peace, I felt a shiver of panic. My essence screamed silently, no, I didn't want to go back. Who in their right mind would trade that ocean of love for the dust and pain of the world? I wanted to stay there forever, dissolved in that light, free from the weight of being Alejandro. It was a temptation stronger than any I had faced in life, the temptation of final rest. But the presence didn't anger at my reluctance. That love was patient. And then the voice echoed inside me again, not with an order but with a purpose, a mission that became the new center of my being. Your struggle has ended, but your work has not. Go back and tell them. Tell them that heaven's gate is narrow, not because I am a cruel God who enjoys seeing his children fail, but because it is the exact size of a heart that has emptied itself. A humble, forgiving heart burning with love. And with that last phrase, the vision dissolved. I no longer had a choice. I felt a violent pull, as if an invisible hook had caught my soul and was dragging me out of that ocean of peace. It was the sensation of a diver being pulled from the depths to the surface too quickly. The light became a distant point. The celestial hum was replaced by a deafening vacuum, and I was sucked back into darkness. It was like being poured back into a clay vessel that was already broken. The impact was brutal. An explosion of white-hot pain hit me, centered in my chest. The bullet's pain, which had disappeared, returned 1,000 times stronger. The cold of the marble floor burned my back. The smell of gunpowder and blood invaded my nostrils, making me gag. I had a body again, a wounded, heavy, agonizing body. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the ceiling of my church, blurred, spinning. The sound of chaos returned all at once, screams, approaching sirens, and a strange, urgent voice shouting something in Spanish very close to my face. I tried to breathe, and my lungs protested with a stab of fire. A face appeared in my field of vision, a man I didn't know, wearing a uniform. He placed something cold and metallic on my chest. I felt my entire body shaken by an electric current, a violent shock that made me arch my back. A hoarse scream escaped my throat. I was alive. I had returned. And while the world spun and pain tried to erase me again, a single certainty shone in my mind with the same intensity as the light I had just left. I was no longer the same man. I had died as a priest of doubtful faith, and been reborn as a witness. The first thing I felt was cold, a metallic, impersonal cold that didn't exist on the other side. It wasn't the cold of my church floor, it was the cold of a hospital gurney. Then came the sound, a sharp, insistent beep that marked the forced rhythm of my heart, and the lights. White, cruel lights that pierced my eyelids and forcibly pulled me from darkness. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choking sound, and the sensation of a plastic tube scratching my throat. It was the sound of the world calling me back by force. I spent days in a fog of pain and medication. I heard voices around me, talking about me as if I weren't there. A miracle, said a nurse. The bullet passed millimeters from the heart, a doctor explained to someone. They spoke of luck, of 1 in a million, of reanimation reflexes. They didn't understand. I tried to scream with my mind for them to hear. It wasn't luck. It was an order. I was sent back. But to them, I was just a body that, against all odds, refused to die. The first visit they allowed me to receive was from Dona Elvira, the lady I had protected. She entered the room slowly, holding a rosary with white knuckles. Her face was a mixture of relief and fear. She didn't look at me as if I were Father Alejandro. She looked at me as if I were a ghost. When she held my hand, hers trembled. "You came back, Father," she whispered, and her eyes filled with tears. I squeezed her hand with what little strength I had. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to speak of the light, the presence, the message, but all I managed was a nod. And I saw in her eyes she didn't need a sermon. She just needed to know the sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Readjustment was the hardest part. The world seemed faded. After having dived into that ocean of colors and pure feelings, reality seemed like a black and white photograph. Food had no taste. Water seemed bland. I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life. People talked about politics, about daily problems, and I felt like a foreigner. How could I worry about the price of bread when I knew the weight of a heart of stone? My body was on earth, but my soul was still homesick. But something fundamental had changed inside me. On the first night I managed to be alone in the room, I tried to pray. I started reciting the Our Father as I had done millions of times in life. But the memorized words seemed like dust in my mouth. I stopped in the middle. The old ritual was dead. Instead, I simply closed my eyes and talked, not with words but with my heart. There was no longer an abyss between me and God. The presence I felt there, I could feel it now, here, like a hot ember in my wounded chest. I no longer asked. I simply listened. The first time I looked at myself in the mirror was a shock. I was thin, pale, with an ugly red scar running down my chest. It looked like a map of devastated land. But it wasn't the scar that caught my attention. It was my eyes. Before, they carried the weight of weariness, doubt, and emptiness I hid from everyone. Now they burned. The emptiness had been filled by a fire, by an urgency that consumed me. The man in the mirror was no longer Father Alejandro, God's employee. He was a witness, and I knew with a certainty that made me tremble that my true mission was just beginning. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life after a life-changing experience? As if the world stayed the same but you had changed forever? Tell me here in the comments. If this journey inspires you somehow, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because the hardest part wasn't coming back from death, but learning to live with the message I brought from there. And that's a story that needs to be told. Leaving the hospital was like being freed from one prison to enter another. The world outside remained the same. People rushed, horns honked, the smell of street food mixed with car exhaust. But to me it was all theater, the stage where the actors didn't know the play was about to end. I returned to my parish, to my small room next to the church. The black cassock hanging in the closet seemed like a costume of a character I no longer played. Everyone expected me to go back to being Father Alejandro, that I would celebrate Mass, hear confessions, that everything would return to normal. But how could I return to normal when I had seen what was eternal? The first time I entered the confessional after returning, I felt a chill. The smell of old wood and dust was no longer of holiness, it was of suffocation. A man entered. His voice was a whisper in the dark. He confessed an affair, the lie to his wife. The old me would have recited the formula of absolution, given a penance and sent him away. But I couldn't. I interrupted him. That's not what's killing your soul, I said, and my voice sounded different, deeper. What's killing you is the heart of stone you're building. Do you repent because you were caught, or because you caused pain? There was silence. And then for the first time I heard a grown man truly sob. That day I didn't absolve a sin. I helped break a stone. My view of people changed completely. I no longer saw sinners and saints. I saw hearts. I saw some that were like gardens, full of life even with some weeds. And I saw others that were like asphalt, hard and permeable, where nothing good could grow. Money, status, all of it became trash to me. I remember a local politician who came to offer me a generous donation to repair the church's stained glass in exchange for a plaque with his name. The old me would have accepted, thinking of the parish's good, but I looked into his eyes and saw the merchant of the temple. I refused. I told him to take that money and build a shelter for street orphans, without a plaque, without a photo in the newspaper. He never came back, and I felt peace. But the biggest change was in the pulpit. My masses weren't the same anymore. I could no longer speak in distant parables. I spoke with fire. I spoke of the urgency of love. I described, without giving all the details, the terrible danger of indifference. I looked at the faces in the church pews and asked, when was the last time your heart burned for someone other than yourself? When did you stop being lukewarm? People became uncomfortable. They wanted the gentle priest who spoke about God's mercy, not this man with flaming eyes who spoke about the responsibility of love. Gradually, the church pews began to empty. They didn't want the truth I brought back. They wanted the comfort of Sunday religion. That's when I understood. My mission was no longer in that church. The order I received wasn't go back and manage a parish, it was go back and tell them, all of them. And then we're out there in the world, lost in the rush, building their hearts of stone, selling their souls for little and living a lukewarm life, not knowing the danger they were in. The hardest decision of my life wasn't facing a bullet. It was taking off my cassock, leaving behind the only life I knew and becoming just Alejandro. No longer a priest of one city, but a witness to the world. My pulpit was no longer made of wood. My pulpit now is this camera. It's you. My life became this mission, to tell what I saw, to warn about what really matters. Not to frighten, but to awaken, because heaven is real, and it's closer than we imagine. But hell isn't a place of fire and brimstone. It's the place where hearts that refuse to love go. Have you ever had to abandon everything you knew to follow a greater purpose, something that burned in your soul? Leave your story here in the comments. If my journey made you reflect, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell because there's much more I need to share. The journey back from death was just the beginning. I didn't come back with commandments written on stone. I came back with a message engraved in fire on my soul, a truth so simple and at the same time so terribly forgotten. The question God will ask at the end of your life, at the threshold of eternity, won't be how many times did you sin? It will be how many times did you love? So I ask you, look inside yourself, now, with the same honesty with which I had to face myself before the light. Examine your heart. Is there some stone of resentment in there, some forgiveness you refuse to give, turning your soul into a cold tomb? Are you using your faith as a shield to feel superior, as merchandise to obtain advantages in this world? Or do you use it as a bridge to connect with another's pain, to serve without expecting applause? And the most important question of all, is your life a flame, or just a lukewarm ember, covered by the ashes of indifference? Do you pass by the hungry, the sad, the wronged, and simply change the channel on the remote control of your life? Heaven isn't a prize for the perfect, it's a home for those who learn to love here, for those who train their hearts in the difficult art of compassion, forgiveness, surrender. The door is always open, but the key is the state of your heart. Don't wait until your last heartbeat to discover if your key still fits the lock. Has your life been a story of burning love or lukewarm indifference? I really want to read your reflection here in the comments. If this message made you stop and think, if it lit something inside you, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because my mission has just begun. There's much more I need to share, much more I saw. And your journey, the journey of your heart, is the only thing that really matters.